couldn't think of a better place to talk to you about the early church as a house church and as the household of God than here in ancient Ephesus, surrounded by a lot of Roman houses. These houses have been excavated over the last few years and represent several centuries in the Roman period, leading up until the end of really the Roman Empire. Over time, they became nicer and nicer, and so many of them have mosaics. They have opened up several homes to become one, so there's gentrification in the city here. And that's really suitable for our topic about understanding the church as the household of God, in fact, in the letter to the Ephesians. Paul describes all of us being one in Christ, Jew and Gentile, all of us being united, and he says, consequently, you are no longer foreigners and aliens, but fellow citizens with God's people and members of God's household. So one of the primary ideas of God's household is that we are one. We are siblings in God's family. There are a lot of other associations. For example, we are loyal to each other. We support each other. We are also in the family business. Lots of things that we unpack in Bible Journey. But what I wanted us to look at here was the idea that the church was not only a spiritual family that shared the blood of Christ, but also the early church was rooted physically in the domestic structures of a household. Right behind me are a series of rooms that surround a patio, an open courtyard with sunlight coming in and a pool and a really nice big wide open area where guests might stay for a visit or they might stay overnight and the family would have their own rooms. Now, this is only for the people that are relatively affluent, but these became structures that were well suited to the early church in between that period when their faith had been rooted in the synagogues as Jews and God-fearing Gentiles, and later on, when some of these would grow and eventually become basilicas, churches, when the church would actually start having their own structures. In fact, there are some house churches that were enlarged to include pieces of them that would serve church-like functions. But in this beautiful time in the first century especially, the early church was rooted in family life in the households. And that means that while it was emphasizing the new kinship in Christ, it was also locating itself in the physical homes of large extended families who had come to faith that were led by families that were often affluent, that were prominent. I love this throwaway line when Paul goes to Thessalonica. Luke tells us in Acts that Paul went there, and after he preached the gospel, many Gentiles came to faith, and not a few prominent Greek women. You see, in Roman society, gender is one factor, but class is another. In the homes of the relatively wealthy, women would often be patrons of certain charitable endeavors, voluntary societies, and the church. In fact, this was the case in Jesus' day. Even in Israel, there were many wealthy women that were not only his followers, but his supporters. And so the early church has this very egalitarian, close to the ground, home-like nature to it that mirrors the spiritual reality that God was giving birth to a new family.